The Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by italki. Become fluent in any language.
So good afternoon. Today I'm going to give a presentation that will discuss a recent trip I had to the south of Brazil. The genesis for this trip came over several years because I had read many times about these I'm not sure if trapped is a good word, but isolated linguistic communities that came about as a result of European immigration in the past in the south of Brazil, or just in Brazil in general. But after several trips to the country, I'd never actually come across anyone who spoke anything other than Portuguese as their native language. So I thought maybe this is just a little bit of a myth. Maybe, you know, it's something like maybe there's an old grandma somewhere who speaks one of the motherland languages because she was born there, or he was, but you don't actually have these communities. So then late last year I did some research online, and I started to discover at least some evidence that there are actually some other linguistic communities speaking European languages in the south of Brazil. And I spent a lot of time researching. It was very hard to figure out whether it was all true or not. You know, you get a little bit snippet of information, but then I found some cultural festivals, and I managed to identify a few regions. So this is the background to how I came up with the idea of the presentation and the trip in general. So when most people think of Brazil, I'm not sure exactly what you think of, but Brazil is huge, right? I mean, it's half a continent. There you have the size of Brazil. It's almost exactly half of South America. So it's a country that's obviously quite diverse in terms of topography and geography, and also in terms of its the European immigration to the country. So the region I'm going to be focusing on is here in the very south. So these are these three most southern states. So you have Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul. So on this trip I actually went to all three of these states. I went to here, Curitiba, also to another town called Prudentópolis in the interior of Paraná. In Santa Catarina, I was in Blumenau, it's about here, Pomorode. And then in Rio Grande do Sul, I went just north of the capital, Porto Alegre, to Caxias do Sul. Yeah. Let's see. So this is more the typical image of Brazil. So this is in the Sambódromo in Rio de Janeiro during the carnival. That's actually, I shot that as well. I was there in the middle of the parade dancing. So this is kind of more the, I guess, typical image most people have of Brazil. So it's a país do samba, caipirinha e futebol. So I guess that would have been my stereotype of Brazil before I visited the country. But this is the reality in the south. It's alemães e italianos. So here we have some, this is shot in Blumenau, this is a photo I took of four musicians. They wouldn't look so out of place in Munich or even here in Berlin. And this is in Caxias do Sul, which was the heartland of the Italian immigration. So they have a wine festival. And Polacos e Ukrainianos. So here, this is in Curitiba. This is a Polish park named after the late Pope John Paul II. And here, this is just a painting I shot in a restaurant in Prudentópolis, which is the center of Ukrainian immigration to the south of Brazil. So, just a short overview of how immigration worked in Brazil. In 1500, there were about 2.4 million Amerindians. I'm not sure how many they count of today, but that was basically who was there at the time of real beginning of European colonization. So the Portuguese began to colonize, and then afterwards in about 1550 they started to bring Africans as slaves to work in plantations. So Salvador de Bahia used to be the capital of Brazil. It was the center of the slave trade, which is why if you go to Salvador today, most people are either more or less of African descent or mixed with Europeans and Amerindians. And then there was a change in 1820 when the Brazilian government began to encourage European immigration. So you had Germans, Italians, Spanish, Portuguese, especially people from the Azores. So you'll see that in the south, in Porto Alegre, you have a large heritage of immigration from the Azores, which are islands just off Portugal. And then in 1850 you had the beginning of slavery. It was made illegal, but it went on till about the 1880s before it was really eradicated. And around this time you had a lot of immigration to the south of Brazil by Germans, Italians, Poles, and Ukrainians. And there's specific reasons for that I'll explain later. And then later on, the beginning of the 20th century, Portuguese, Spanish, Central Europeans, so a lot of Poles, a lot of people from Poland, Romania, and Russia. They weren't necessarily those ethnicities. For example, a lot of the people from Romania were ethnic Hungarians. And you also had a lot of Syrian and Lebanese. So you can find a lot of great Lebanese food and Syrian food in São Paulo, along with Japanese who came in the 1930s. So you'll see that especially in São Paulo, which is the commercial capital of Latin America. There's a plethora of both Lebanese and Japanese people and cuisine. So the three southern states, Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul, they have a slightly different history. Because in 1835 you had the Ragamuffin War, which is Guerra dos Farrapos. And this was a war for independence for broadly Rio Grande do Sul and later a part of Santa Catarina. So you saw here on the map, they're the three most southern states. So they actually fought a very bloody war for independence from Brazil. And the war left about 20,000 people dead. And actually today, which I found very interesting when I went to Rio Grande do Sul, you still have a lot of, at least I noticed, two of the most prominent towns nearby where I was were named after Bento Gonçalves and Garibaldi, who's a name that most people, at least most Europeans, will recognize, because he was the unifier of Italy later on. So there's still towns bearing the names of these separatists, which is interesting. I found that they didn't change their names, or they were actually named in honor of these people. So the Brazilian government began to give plots of land to new European immigrants for two main reasons. One was a bulwark against separatism. So after this war, Guerra dos Farrapos, and to prevent invasion from neighboring Spanish-speaking countries. So they wanted a large number of new and supposedly loyal immigrants from Europe who would prevent both of those events happening in the south. So Paraná, the capital is Curitiba, and it has 4 parks. And each of these parks are dedicated to each of the main immigrant groups that came to the city. So you have a German park, an Italian park, a Polish park, and Ukrainian park. So the photo of the Polish park is the one in Curitiba. And it even has a particular accent influenced by the immigration. So instead of leite quente, as you would say, kind of standard Brazilian Portuguese, they have leite quente. So a lot closer to Italian in the way, in terms of people speak. And in the south of Brazil, in terms of large ethnic concentrations, you have Pomorode, which I visited, which is 90% German descent. Nova Venezia in Santa Catarina is 95% Italian. Prudentópolis, which I also visited, is 70% Ukrainian. And Dom Feliciano in Rio Grande do Sul is 90% Polish. So, this is Curitiba, and these are just some photos I took from the 4 parks. So this is not in Lviv in Western Ukraine, this is actually in Curitiba in Brazil. This is the Ukrainian park, and this is just a shot of the entrance to the Polish one. So this is in the Ukrainian park when I walked in. I don't know if people can hear it properly, but... So this is Mikhail, he works in the park. He's an ethnic Ukrainian, Brazilian Ukrainian. So when I walked in, he said hello to me in Ukrainian. So I replied, I don't speak very much Ukrainian, but I do speak reasonable Russian. So I chatted to him in Russian, and it was mutually intelligible. So it was quite funny. He was very excited. He hadn't met too many people who could speak back to him. But he told me they had previously 2 Ukrainians who had come to the park since he had started work there. So that's just to give an example. So he's just describing his background. He's just saying who he is and that he's Brazilian and that his mother tongue is Ukrainian, or he's from Ukrainian descent. So probably a little bit better known are the Deutsche Kolonien in South America. So you have the Polnish and Rio Grandense Handschriftlich. So it's a Deutsch, these are two German dialects, Deutsch and Dialekte. It's the Amtssprache in Städte in Espírito Santo, which is a little bit further north, is also in Minas Gerais, as well as Santa Catarina Rio Grande do Sul. So I haven't gone to see where there's also some pockets of German colonization in these two states, but I didn't get a chance to go there, a little bit more isolated. So there are official municipal languages, these two German dialects in these areas. So Festa Pomerana is an annual event in Pomoroggi, which is a town, I think about 30,000 people, which is 90% German ethnically. And I went that, you'll see some photos later. And man kann alles auf Deutsch in dieser Stadt machen. It's wie ein kleines Deutschland. They actually have that written all over the city, as well as saying that it's Cidade mais alemã do Brasil, the most German city of Brazil. It's the closest fest for Deutsche Kultur. So this is me at Festa Pomerana. So you can see everybody's in traditional tracht. I brought my lederhosen. Everyone thought it was crazy. I managed to wear 4 times in the south of Brazil at different events. So there all the girls are in dirndl, and as you can see, traditional music. If this photo was taken, if you saw this photo in a newspaper, you just swear it was Oktoberfest in Munich. So this is how strong it is. So that's what it's like there. Completely, it was a really authentic festival. That's what I found very, very interesting. I wasn't sure what to expect. I had thought, okay, it looks very family oriented. Maybe they just a few kids and some old people dress up and just go to celebrate for the day. But really, it was very young, the festival. And in Pomoroggi, I spoke, I would say about 50% of the time, the locals in German. Of course, there are people who go there because it's quite prosperous from other parts who don't speak German, but basically I did everything from arriving in the bus station. I just asked if I could speak in German in the bus station. They were like, ja, natürlich. Sie können alles auf Deutsch machen. And then my taxi driver asked me, are you German? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? When he heard my accent in Portuguese, so apparently I sound a little bit German, which is disconcerting. But and everything up to going to the shop, going to the restaurant, going to the cafe, I just spoke in German and everybody was completely normal about it. So, very enjoyable event for the Festa Pomerana. It's a very local event. There were very few tourists from anywhere else, some people from maybe São Paulo, but it was really genuine, real German food, beer, music, and as you can see, atmosphere and traditional clothes. So definitely felt like being in a kleines Deutschland. So in the neighboring bigger town, you have Blumenau, which has the zweitgrößte Volksfest Brasiliens and the zweitgrößte Oktoberfest der Welt. So after Munich, the Oktoberfest in Blumenau is the biggest in the world. So think about that. That's just only Munich. So there's no Oktoberfest or kind of local festival in Germany that's as big as the one in Blumenau. So I went to their Sommerfest, which is kind of obviously a summer version, and they have a huge kind of tent that you can go and be as if you're at Oktoberfest. It's quite fun. And they have all local beer. So the other place I went to was Entre Rios, called Guarapava, which is in Paraná. And there you have 10,000 Einwohner, 5 deutsche Kolonien. And again, I went to a local brewery and I drank German beer. And here you can see the same, this is actually Santa Catarina, a little bit about how people who are German descent live. So this is
Aqui, a língua oficial da casa é o alemão.
Das ist alles in der Buch, was lernt ihr von
das
uns?
lernt in Deutsch und dann hier unten steht dann nachher in Brasilianisch auch dasselbe Wort, was hier oben steht. Porque a gente é dessa geração, meus bisavós talvez, não sei, vieram da Alemanha, que eu sei que eles são de lá. E os meus pais sempre ensinaram a gente, o que você pode, você tem que passar para frente.
So there she's just talking about how her, she's not even sure what lineage came from Germany. It's like grandparents, great-grandparents, or where they're really from, but just part of the culture in the south of Brazil. This is actually Santa Catarina, and that's how vibrant German culture and language is there today. So that was quite an enjoyable and interesting phenomenon to observe. So then I had the proof that, okay, it's not all just my imagination or fantasy. There really are these kind of communities in the south of Brazil. And next I went to Rio Grande do Sul, to just north of the capital, Porto Alegre, to Caxias do Sul. So in this area, I'm going to speak in Italian a little bit. Immigrazione all'italiana, so tra 10 e 15% della popolazione brasiliana è discendente di immigrati italiani. So about 10 to 15% of the Brazilian population is of Italian descent. Nel sud del Brasile la popolazione è venuta dal Veneto, so most people came from the very north of Italy, who settled in the south of Brazil. So I went to Caxias do Sul, and the first thing I noticed is that I felt like I had shrunk about 10 centimeters, because a bit like the effect I get when I come to the Netherlands, right? Because people are super tall there compared to everywhere else. Everybody was very, very tall in Caxias do Sul. Like Brazilians in general, of course, are a mixture, but they're not known for being particularly tall people. But in this town, everybody was at least 5 or 6 centimeters taller than the rest of Brazil. Everybody looked Italian. And the food, everything was like being in northern Italy. So it was, and they had amazing wine. So it was really like a tiny, and Brazil is the last country you would think of drinking wine in, but this small area has great wine. And they have a local dialect that I read about called Il Talian, which sounds like Italian basically. And it's considerato un idioma a base veneta con influssi di altri dialetti italiani e del portoghese. So it's basically Venetian dialect with some influences from Portuguese. And it's a co-official language in the commune of Serfina Correia in Rio Grande do Sul, which is 90% Italian origin. So I went to the Festa da Uva, which is un evento biannuale a Caxias do Sul. So it's a biannual wine event in the south. And then I visited Bento Gonçalves, which I told you was named after one of the separatists, Caxias do Sul, Garibaldi, Canela. So città con influenza italiana, architettura, cibo, vino. So everything feels like being in northern Italy. The architecture, the people. The only thing I noticed is a bit different, they didn't gesticulate very much. So they're the only Italians I've ever met who didn't use their hands. So that apparently they've adopted from the Brazilians. But everything else was really like being in Italy. I felt like speaking Italian to them all the time because it just felt like we were back in Italy. So this is the entrance to Bento Gonçalves. So it's known for its wine. And this is what it looks like, vineyards and more Italian, northern Italian style architecture.
Fatto a 10 anni mais ou menos, e quasi tutti i vignai e fa parte del proprio complexo dell'hotel. E qua avanti aveva tutto a Lyon. È molto bello il nome del posto anche. Chiesa lì è il municipio di Montebello.
Lì è un po' lontano di qua. 5 km forse, no? So I'm not sure if you could hear that very well, but they're speaking Italian. And everything is, if you speak Italian, Portuguese, everything is understandable. But it's a bit like listening to Portuñol, which if it's ever experienced on the border between Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil, is like a mixture of Spanish and Portuguese, and it's very hard to know which language you're supposed to reply in because it sounds like Brazilian Portuguese, but everything is like Spanish words. So it felt a little bit like that. So I spoke with him in Italian, and he spoke back in Italian. And the reason why he could speak it is because his wife also is from the town, so they use it every day. And it's a dialect that only exists in this one town. So it's a mixture of different Venetian dialects with some Portuguese that then become its own language almost. So this is example to Italian, Veneto Brasileiro. So afterwards, I went to Prudentopolis. So ukrainskoj imigracji. About 20,000 Ukrainians arrived between 1895 and 1897, so they came from Galicia. So do Brazylii przyjechali blisko 20,000 Ukraińców. And then there was a second wave of immigration between 1909 and 1914, and about 18,000 more came to work on a railroad between São Paulo and Rio Grande. So the town of Preventopolis has about 50,000 residents, and 75% are of Ukrainian descent today. So it's not a small place, it's 50,000 people. And this is the dialect they all speak. So it's a particular dialect. I'm not even sure how it's supposed to go. Nadnistratskoj Horów. So that's 100 rokів versia, so a 100-year-old version of Ukrainian from a particular area in Galicia. And Páscoa Ucraniana, festa importante in Prudentopolis. So the most important festival of the year is probably Easter. So they have a Ukrainian or Easter celebrations with the kind of things you would see in Poland, Russia with the painted eggs, all that. And you're in the middle of Brazil and it's 35 degrees Celsius, and everyone's speaking Ukrainian. So this is what it looks like. This is in the main town of Prudentopolis. There you can see Samny Bog. It's a cross by the cathedral in Kenitio. And this was interesting because afterwards we drove out like an hour and a half on a non-asphalt road. And in the middle of the countryside, there's a Ukrainian church. Because they were given plots of land all on the line going up, several hours drive outwards, and they have 18 churches littered around the region. So in the middle of nowhere, you can come across a Ukrainian church, and people there, if you speak to them in Ukrainian, they will chat back to you. Onde eu morei, em Odessa, no sul.
Що те в Одесі перебуваєш, знаєш російську мову, а по-українськи лише розумієш. Ми тут говоримо українською мовою, щоб її навчились наші батьки, які приїхали з Галичини, з австрійської Галичини до Бразилії. І ми тут дуже добре почуваємося. Бо Бразилія нам дала всі права.
Alright, so she actually made fun of me off camera for not speaking Ukrainian, speaking Russian, but so she says you can understand me, and she then describes what it's like to be a Ukrainian Brazilian. So people there, what they told me is that they're Brazilians. Very few of them, of course, have gone actually to Ukraine. This old woman actually who's the curator at the museum, she'd been there twice. And in general, they feel Brazilian, but of course they speak Ukrainian at home because they come from a particular church, and they tend to intermarry in that church. So what happens is generation after generation, they marry other Ukrainian speakers. So it's actually pretty easy for them to maintain. So anyway, Polska immigracja. I don't speak Polish, so I couldn't rewrite anything in Polish on this, unfortunately. So between 1869 and 1970, entraram 130 mil imigrantes poloneses no Brasil, dos quais 50% estão radicados ou deixaram descendentes no Paraná, 38% no Rio Grande do Sul, and 5% in Santa Catarina. So there were 130,000 immigrants from Poland to Brazil in this century, and 50% of them stayed in Paraná, which is the most northern state. And they were predominantly Roman Catholics or Jews, which makes sense because they're the two religions in Poland. And interesting, of the four communities, Polish was the one that has the least traces. So in 1939, after the rise of fascism in Europe, o governo brasileiro proibiu o uso de línguas estrangeiras em espaço público, fidel aos estrangeiros o exercício de qualquer atividade política, proibiu a circulação de jornais, revistas e outras publicações na imprensa. So the Brazilian government banned all foreign languages in 1938 in Brazil. That included German, Polish, Ukrainian, Italian. So they weren't allowed to use it in public. They had to close down all their newspapers. So there's this process of Brazilianization in the country. And this seems to have affected the Poles more than the other three communities. they still have some schools and organizations and societies. And if you go to certain bars in Curitiba, you can speak in Polish. But it was definitely the community that had the least kind of traces. But it's actually in the Polish language, Curitiba is the only city in Brazil that actually has a different spelling. There's actually a particular spelling for it because it had such a large community, and they had a Bosque de Papa, São Paulo II. So the Pope, they have this particular park named after the Pope. So Copernicus and Cracovia. So Polish sausage is still very common in the region. It's one thing you see everywhere, and this park is particularly nice. So this is a Polish household in southern Brazil.
Na casa da família Filhakoski, na Serra da Garganta, mesa é lugar de confraternização e de muita fartura.
Esse é o pernil, pieczono kaszwińska, zimne nogi, chrzan, bołasie z miodu, skwarki melune, chleb na bochenkach, podkolany, pirogi z łepa
Everybody knows pierogi, I'm sure.
okrasa wędzona.
So that's actually just from Brazilian TV, a documentary about the different communities in Santa Catarina. So why are there such reasons for differences? So Italian is close to the Portuguese. So what I discovered, German speakers seem to have the strongest, more individual, different culture or maintained culture, right? So German is the most widely spoken of the four languages. It's definitely the community you saw the most visible in terms of traditions. So German communities were very strong commercially in southern Brazil, and they had enormous families. I think the average fertility rate for German Brazilian woman in 1880 was like 10 kids. And so they weren't actually any more in terms of the number of people who left Europe to come, but they had enormous families. They were wealthier, so the children survived into adulthood. So they quickly, I guess, populated the region at a faster rate than the others. As I said, the Ukrainians have one single church concentrated in 2 cities, so it was a little bit easier for them to maintain their language and culture because they all intermarry each other. And what struck me as unusual is the fact there were 1 million Brazilian Poles living in Paraná alone in one state, but you don't hear Polish anywhere. So that was a little bit of a mystery to me. So I just had a few thoughts. I haven't found any literature that could really elucidate why that is. So they were all Catholics, or majority Catholics, or else some Jews who came as well. They had the same religion as the Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian immigrants, so that facilitated intermarriage integration. German was the language of commerce, so actually other immigrants learned German in the south of Brazil until it was banned in the late 30s. The Polish and Ukrainian areas are also a bit noticeably poorer than the German and Italian areas, so possibly it wasn't as advantageous to speak those languages for business. And of course you had the prohibition of foreign languages, which accelerated the adoption of Portuguese amongst Polish speakers there. So, salute, so this is some typical food in the Italian area. So you have some, can't remember, some sort of ravioli, I can't remember the name in Italian, it's a smaller type. And then you have Italian, well, for me it could have been in Italy, the wine, it was so good. And here I am with a friend in a German brewery, so we have some deutsches Bier. Man fühlt sich zu Hause in Brasilien. Sie sind in casa in Brasilien. And this is not in Russia or Ukraine, this is in Brazil.
O bolo no dia do casamento, esta é a dança do Korovai, o ponto alto dos casamentos ucranianos. O pão doce é todo enfeitado e vira símbolo do sol e do amor que deve habitar a vida do novo casal.
So, there you go. So let's just explain the dance of the Korovai, which is a tradition at, I guess, not just Ukrainian weddings, but also Russian weddings, I think. Well, what I read online was that it's maintained in Russia and by the Brazilian Ukrainian community. It's not actually so common in modern Ukraine, this tradition. So they dance around the brevis to symbolize, I think she said in the footage there, to symbolize their life together, something like that. So, obrigado, danke, grazie, dziękuję, dziękuję, and I hope you enjoyed a different version of Brazil. Okay, I think do we have someone else with the... Antonio, that's it.
Hello, I have two questions. The first one, which religion do the Germans have? And the second question, I noticed that the Ukrainian dialect is Galician, the Italian dialect is Venetian. Both regions belonged to Austria in the 19th century. It's especially look for people from Austrian Empire.
That's a very good observation. So the Germans are evangelische, so Protestants, I guess in English, you know. And so you have their churches everywhere across the region, which are obviously very distinct. And then you're completely correct to point out that the immigrants from, especially from Galicia, at the time was in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I guess that's why they left. They didn't want to be in Austria anymore. But no, they got offered. So people from the Austro-Hungarian Empire were basically offered the land, and it happened that the Ukrainians came. But the government divided it based on ethnicity. So they have Poles who came. They actually got distinct plots. They would all live in a line here, and then the Ukrainians live here, and then other Germans live here. So the Brazilian government, I saw the map of in the Ukrainian Museum with the plots delineated on a map for the entire region, and you could see Pole, Ukrainian, German. So they planned it out that they would live in these communities close to each other. As for the Italians in Veneto, I'm not sure if were they really from Austro-Hungarian Empire. I haven't posted. Okay, that's possible that they came in the same wave of immigration. But Italians in general are 10 to 15% of Brazilian. Well, 10 to 50% of Brazilians have some Italian heritage. So they came from all different parts of Italy, but predominantly in the south of Brazil, they came from this region. But I'm not entirely sure if they were in the Austro-Hungarian Empire all the time when they came. I think it was maybe a mixture. It would seem by the timeline. But very good observation.
This may be outside your field of competence, but do you know if they try to maintain any sort of contact with their original countries? I mean, do they send their children to study in Germany or Italy, for instance?
So I asked them that. Some people told me, yeah, I have a son, and he went to study in Germany. The Ukrainians told me, no, we're going to stay here. We're Brazilians who speak Ukrainian and for Ukrainian descent. So they had no ambition to go to Ukraine. Maybe the incentive is a little bit less, of course, economically. The Italians, they didn't have any ties at all. They didn't really consider themselves necessarily Italian. They like the fact, of course, to say I'm Italian Brazilian, but they're Brazilians, so they don't really think of it in that way. And Poles, they don't really speak. I didn't find people who spoke Polish. They're all, of course, proud to say that they're 100% of the Polish lineage, but they have no desire to really to visit Poland. It didn't seem. At least that's more an anecdote than anything empirical, right? But definitely, so some people told me their children studied in Germany. It seemed that the Germans had maybe the strongest. Also, when I was there at Festa Paraná, I was the only foreigner, non-Brazilian, there that I could see. I mean, I didn't meet anyone, I didn't see anyone who didn't look like they were Brazilian. Or I didn't hear anyone speak anything other than, okay, they were speaking German as well. But so in general, there isn't much even tourism, European tourism to the region. Most people who go to Brazil, of course, from the first clip I showed you, go to Carnival, Rio de Janeiro, Cidade Maravilhosa, and they travel maybe to Salvador de Bahia, they go to the beaches in Florianópolis, but very few people are really, I guess, interested on a trip to Brazil, since their images of samba and cocktails by the beach to go 5 hours into the interior and find a Ukrainian town and eat some Polish sausage. That isn't really what people travel thousands of kilometers to experience if they come from Europe. So in general, it seemed there was very little contact. in Blumenau, just one thing that occurs to me, in Blumenau, when I went to Summerfest, there was a German organization, because they had t-shirts, and they had come, and there were some people maybe in their 60s who I assume were German, because they had it written on the back, but there was like 5 of them, and that was it. They were the only other things I saw that maybe suggest some sort of contact.
Hello, I have a question. Have you by chance met some Jewish immigrants from those countries, for instance, Ukraine or Poland? Because at the time that you had a lot of immigrants coming to Brazil, both Ukraine and Poland was a part of the Russian Empire, and they had a significant Jewish community. So I wonder how Jewish found themselves as Brazilian immigrants. Would they consider themselves Jewish or Brazilians or Ukrainians or both? And which language would they speak?
So the Ukrainian immigrants were almost entirely from this one particular religious, I guess, sect, cult, religious group that's based in Western Ukraine. And at the time it wasn't part of the Russian Empire, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So that immigration would have been a little bit different. Of course, there was large-scale or significant Jewish immigration to Brazil. I have no friends who are Jewish or Brazilian. And what was interesting, they were Sephardic Jews and had come from Turkey, so they spoke Ladino. And the older generation still speak Ladino to each other, which is, if you speak Spanish or Portuguese, very easy to understand. That's all I can really say about Jews to Brazil. I don't know. I didn't meet in the south of Brazil. Yeah, of course I've met people who are Jewish, but there isn't like, I've never noticed a very big noticeable community. Like I haven't seen 10 synagogues in the town or something like that, but which is just they're concentrated. They tend to be quite prominent. A bit similar maybe to Syrians and Lebanese, quite prominent in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, I would say. Any other questions? Anyone want to do a samba genio for us or dance? Dance at the Corovai? Antonio? Sorry. Okay, I'll give you some bread. I think that's great. Okay, thanks very much. So if you want to find out just one last thing, if you want to see some more about this phenomenon, I can give you the details of a series of documentaries that was made around the same time by a friend of mine, Aline Lehnhardt. And she made about each of these, actually some of the footage, that's her footage, the ones that were in Polish and stuff like that. So just write me a message or something, and I'll even put on my Facebook page the link to her TV station, and you can watch more if you're planning to go to Brazil. Okay, thank you. Obrigado. Ciao.